Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on accessing NFS storage. After completing this lab video, you will be able to configure ESXi servers so that they have access to a network file system, NFS, storage. NFS storage is file-based network storage. Just like iSCSI, you need a VM kernel adapter that is used to connect to the NFS server over an IP network. While it is possible to use a single VM kernel adapter for everything, management, iSCSI, and NFS, the recommendation is that you use a dedicated VM kernel adapter for NFS. Note that in the lab we will simply add an NFS data store and mount it on two ESXi hosts. The VM kernel adapter configuration on the ESXi hosts is not shown. What should you already know when watching this video? Well, you should already be familiar with the vSphere client user interface and you should have a basic understanding of storage solutions. In this lab exercise, we will first add an NFS data store and mount it on ESXi hosts SA-ESXi01 and SA-ESXi02. Then we will view information about the NFS data store. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on accessing NFS storage. Now, let's get started. In the first task of this lab exercise, we will add the NFS data store. When doing that, we have to select the NFS version that we want to use, we have to provide the path to the shared folder and the IP address of the NFS server, and we have to choose the authentication method. Then we will verify that the data store shows up in the navigation pane. We want to perform the configuration on vCenter server SA-VCSA01. So the first step is to connect to this server. Then we log in as administrator at vsphere.local. To add the NFS data store, we first have to go to data store or storage in the navigator pane. Now let me expand the ICM data center. Now I right-click ICM data center, select storage, and then we have to click new data store here. First, we have to select the type. So we want to add a network file system, NFS data store. So that's the option we select. Then we click next. Now we have to select the NFS version. Nowadays, NFS 3 and NFS 4.1 are common, and these are the versions that are supported on our ESXi hosts. In most cases, you will choose NFS 4.1. But for example, if you have an ESXi host of a version that is earlier than 6.0, then only NFS 3 would be a choice for you. Of course, the NFS server itself also has to support the version that we select here. In our case, this is NFS version 4.1. So we select it and we click next. Now we enter the name of the data store. Let's use NFS data store. Then we have to enter the folder that is shared by the NFS server. In our case, that is NFS data. Then we provide the IP address of the server. Our server has the IP address 172.20.10.10. Instead of an IP address, of course, you could also enter a fully qualified domain name, for example. And now you see the plus symbol here. We click the plus symbol, and that adds our server to the list down here. Why would we want to use a list? You would provide more than one IP address if you want to use multipathing and session trunking. Then you could reach your NFS server by more than one IP address. Note that down here you could activate the checkbox that says Mount NFS as read-only. Well, it's self-explaining. If you check that box, then you cannot write to that NFS data store. What could be a real-life example for mounting an NFS data store in read-only mode? Well, for sure you wouldn't store any virtual machine disk files there because you have to write to those as soon as you power up the virtual machine. But think about a storage that you use to provide ISO images, for example, that you want to mount as DVDs. Then your ESXi servers only need to read from those ISOs, and there is no need to enable write access. Anyway, in our case, we want to have write access, so we are done here and we click Next. Now we have to configure the authentication option. And just to let you know, if we had picked NFS version 3 earlier, then we wouldn't have that option. Only NFS 4.1 gives us the options of selecting different authentication types. One is not to use Kerberos authentication. The other one would be to use Kerberos authentication for authentication only, so only for logging into the server. And then there is a third option where you can use Kerberos authentication also for data integrity. So the IP packets that we would exchange when accessing the data store would have keyed hashes, HMACs, hash-based message authentication codes added to it, and they are verified on the receiving side. So if packets would have been changed in transit, for example by a man in the middle, then this falsification would be detected. In our case, we don't use any authentication, so we leave the default and we click Next. Now we have to select which ESXi hosts should be able to access the data store. In our case, we want to use both of them, SA-ESXi01 and SA-ESXi02. So we click Next. Now we can review the data that we entered and we click Finish. In the recent tasks at the bottom, you can see that the NAS data store was created. And when you look to the navigator pane, we also see that the NFS data store is listed here. When I select the NFS data store, in the navigator pane, we could then go to the main window on the right and select the Hosts tab. And that again shows us that the NFS data store is connected on our two ESXi servers, SA-ESXi01 and SA-ESXi02. In the second and final task of the lab, we want to view information about the NFS storage. So in the navigator pane, we have to select the data store. In our case, it is already selected. And then this time, we click the Summary tab. Up here we can see the type of the data store, so it's NFS version 4.1. We can also see the capacity, so that's close to 32 gigabyte, the free space, 12 gigabyte, and the used space, almost 20 gigabyte. Under Details, you can also see the IP address of the server that provides access to the NFS data store, and you also see what the path to the shared folder is, NFS data in our case. Congratulations! You have completed the Accessing NFS Storage lab demonstration video. In this lab, we first added an NFS data store and mounted it on two ESXi hosts. We verified that the data store was added in the navigator pane, and then we reviewed information about the NFS data store. You now know how to configure access to NFS data stores. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments. And good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.